Tonight, an exclusive interview with Kentucky Senator and GOP presidential candidate Rand Paul. He discusses how the U.S. should deal with ISIS and whether he would support a constitutional amendment to protect traditional marriage. And later, part 2 of my interview with Walter Cardinal Casper. He lashes out at the critics of his controversial proposal for divorced and remarried Catholics. And he tells us where the Synod could go. Father GERALD Murray will be here to react. The World Over Live begins right now.
Now, from Washington, D.C., Raymond Arroyo.
A warm welcome to all of you joining us in the United States and the world over. My exclusive interview with Senator Rand Paul and part 2 of my must-see conversation with Cardinal Walter Casper is ahead. Father GERALD Murray will react. If you'd like to comment on tonight's show, I'm live tweeting throughout. I'm on Twitter at Raymond Arroyo, or you can email us at worldover@EWTN.com. Let's get to it. Here's the brief news from the world over this week. Pope Francis met privately with Russian President Vladimir Putin on Wednesday for 50 minutes. Vatican spokesman Father Federico Lombardi said Pope Francis took the opportunity to urge Putin to work for a peaceful resolution to the conflict in Ukraine, as well as the humanitarian crisis and the Christian persecution in the Middle East. As was the case at their last meeting in 2013, Putin was late by an hour for his appointment. And Pope Francis has created a new Vatican tribunal to address the bishop's failure to report cases of sexual abuse. This tribunal will be established within the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith to, quote, judge bishops with regard to crimes of the abuse of office when connected to the abuse of minors, end quote. For years, the Vatican has been criticized for not doing more to punish or remove bishops accused of protecting abusive clergy. Last year, the Pope accepted the resignation of Kansas City's St. Joseph Bishop Robert Finn, who had been convicted for failing to report suspected abuse. According to Vatican spokesman Father Lombardi, the new tribunal establishes a process by which the Holy See can discipline or remove bishops who are deemed negligent in handling sexual abuse cases. But the Pope always had the power to remove negligent bishops. And Pope Francis once again addressed what he calls gender ideology. On Monday, at a meeting with Puerto Rican bishops in Rome, the Holy Father observed that traditional marriage between one man and one woman is, quote, being questioned by the so-called gender ideology that seeks to undermine the proper understanding of marriage, as well as human sexuality. Noting that the family is under attack by a number of social ills, Francis stressed that the value and beauty of marriage comes from the complementarity of men and women, which he referred to as the crown of God's creation. And the Holy Father seems to be tamping down expectations that the Church might soon recognize the purported Marian apparitions of Medjugorje. Days after announcing on his return trip from Bosnia-Herzegovina that a decision about Medjugorje was imminent, the Pope warned against visionaries and the constant search for special insight or novelty in the faith. During his homily at the Mass on Tuesday, the Pope appeared to mock such devotions, joking about those who might ask, quote, where are the visionaries who might tell us exactly what message Our Lady will be sending at 4 o'clock this afternoon? The Pope did not directly mention Medjugorje, but the comment resembled Medjugorje devotees and the seers who claimed to have received messages from the Virgin Mary since 1981. They also announce when upcoming messages are expected. Since the first reported apparition in the small Herzegovian town, millions have made pilgrimages there, and the devotion is celebrated by many Catholics worldwide. We will continue to follow this story. Back in the U.S., President Barack Obama is putting his best spin on his signature health care law, days ahead of a Supreme Court decision that could mark its demise. On Tuesday, he declared the Affordable Care Act a reality of American life. Obama made the here-to-stay remarks at the annual Catholic Health Association conference here in Washington. He again personally thanked Sister Carol Keehan, head of the Catholic Hospital Trade Association, for her decisive role in pushing the measure through Congress in 2010.
Her steadiness, her strength, her steadfast voice have been an inspiration to me. We would not have gotten the Affordable Care Act done had it not been for her. I want to thank the entire Catholic Health Association.
You may remember Sister Keehan on this show vigorously defending the Catholic Health Association's push for the measure and her repeated claim that she was not at cross purposes with the U.S. bishops. The bishops opposed the ACA over abortion funding and conscience protection concerns. The soon-to-be-released Supreme Court ruling could trigger the collapse of a key ACA funding mechanism, which would require congressional action for the health plan to continue. And a three-judge panel at the U.S. Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals upheld a Texas abortion law credited with closing multiple abortion clinics. The 2013 law requires most of the state's abortion facilities to meet the same safety standards as other surgical centers. It also requires abortion doctors to have admitting privileges at local hospitals. The law has led to the shuttering of more than 40 abortion facilities. Just 7 remain open. Abortion rights activists say the law unduly and unconstitutionally restricts access to abortion. The petitioners in the case say they will appeal the decision to the Supreme Court. And in a related story, the number of abortions in the United States has declined by 12% since 2010. This, according to the data collected across 45 states by the Associated Press. There is some disagreement as to why abortions are down. President of Planned Parenthood, Cecilia Richards, said it is because of better access to birth control and sex education. Charmaine Yost of Americans United for Life attributes it to an increased awareness of the humanity of the baby. She says there's an entire generation of women who saw a sonogram of their child's first baby picture. There are new concerns over a report that the Islamic State could soon develop its own weapon of mass destruction. According to Australian intelligence, ISIS has enough radioactive material to suggest it has the capacity to build a large and devastating dirty bomb. ISIS seized the radioactive materials from research centers and hospitals as it swept through Iraq and Syria. The jihadist group declared its ambition to develop weapons of mass destruction in the most recent edition of its propaganda magazine. NATO, as well as the Indian officials have previously expressed concerns that ISIS could acquire a nuclear weapon, possibly in Pakistan. And as ISIS continues to gain a foothold in Libya, 88 Eritrean Christian migrants have been abducted in that country. According to reports, they were taken in a dawn raid on June 3rd while traveling by truck on their way to Tripoli. Eyewitnesses who escaped the kidnapping said the militant Muslims asked their captives questions about the Quran. Several of those kidnapped were children, and at least 12 were women. And finally, the Holy See on Wednesday signed an historic agreement with the United States to pinpoint American taxpayers hiding assets within the Vatican Bank. The deal aims to identify people who are not annually declaring all their foreign assets to the U.S. Internal Revenue Service. U.S. officials would not say how many U.S. individuals hold money at the Vatican, but the number is believed to be rather small, perhaps in the dozens. The Holy See becomes the latest of approximately 62 countries to sign on to the U.S. Foreign Account Tax Compliance Act. Is there nowhere to sanctify your money these days? When we return, he garnered headlines for his filibuster against the NSA and for his independent views on foreign policy. Up next, my exclusive interview with Kentucky Senator and GOP presidential candidate Rand Paul. We talk gay marriage, how to stop ISIS, and the role of faith in his life. The World Over continues in a moment. Stay right there.
Now, once again, Raymond Arroyo.
Welcome back to The World Over. He consistently polls in the upper tier of GOP presidential candidates. I sat down this week with Kentucky Senator Rand Paul here in Washington. The Maverick senator discussed how the U.S. should work to contain ISIS, how his faith affects the way he approaches issues, and would he support a constitutional amendment to protect traditional marriage should he become president. Here's the first of our Presidential Contenders series and my interview with Rand Paul. I was struck in the book, you talk about your Christianity, Presbyterian. How does that affect the way you approach these issues that you're grappling with and that we all face as a country?
Well, I think that I look at everything through a lens of what's right and what's wrong. You know, I do believe in a moral code. It comes from my religion, but it also, is part of who I am, and I think that it's wrong to steal. I think it's wrong to hurt others, but I think it's also wrong to sort of steal from another generation, so for my kids and my grandkids, don't have any grandkids yet, but I think it's wrong to steal from those generations and spend their money now and leave them with this enormous debt. And I think that's one thing that I think is immoral about what we do in government.
There's a great line in the book. You quote Dostoevsky, and you say, "I did not arrive at my Hosanna through childlike faith, but through a fiery furnace of doubt." About what?
Well, I came from a science and math kind of background, and I'm a physician. And as a physician, you end up seeing a lot of things that other people don't ever have to see. And I think a lot of people see, people struggle and people die and terrible things that happen to people. But part of the Hippocratic Oath, when they say you're not supposed to reveal things to others, it's not just about privacy. There are certain aspects of living and dying that most people don't have to look at. And I think they're troubling. And makes it harder to see, God's hand in things when you see terrible things happen to people.
Up close, yeah. That's always a struggle, I'm sure. You recently introduced a piece of legislation, something called the Life at Conception Act. It invokes the 14th Amendment. To what end?
Well, I think the goal is to drive the debate about when life begins. So many people, I think, are flippant about it, really on both sides. And we end up having people who, and I had this debate with Debbie Wasserman Schultz over this. When does life begin? I'm an ophthalmologist, and so I examine little babies in the neonatal nursery. Sometimes they're only 1 or 2 pound babies, and we examine them to try to prevent a form of blindness that is treatable with a laser or, in the old days, with a freezing treatment. But this 1 pound baby, once it's born, everybody says, well, that baby has rights. Whether you're liberal or conservative, everybody thinks that the state can intervene to protect anyone from aggressing against that individual. Right. But my question to Debbie Wasserman Schultz was, well, what about a 7 pound baby a week before birth? Does that baby have any rights? And she said it was completely between their doctor and them. And it's like, well, not if it's alive. So we really should have this debate. And we get trapped by the other side, the liberals who always want to talk about the very beginning of gestation. Right. And I think it's important to talk about and make them express their opinion that a 6, 7, 8 pound baby has no rights. But I believe for religious and scientific reasons, though, that life begins at the beginning. Otherwise, we just keep finding, an arbitrary, we find an arbitrary time. And the thing is that I think the other side needs to say why life isn't there in the 3rd trimester, make them take up the difficult argument and begin there. But I think, frankly, as science has changed, when I was in medical school, it was very difficult for a 28 to 30 week baby to survive. And now it's a 26 week baby, or sometimes even a 22 week baby survives.
I want to talk about foreign policy, something that you have really distinguished yourself, particularly in this Republican field. Let's talk for a moment about Iraq. We have Donald Rumsfeld coming out and saying it was unrealistic to try to bring democracy to Iraq. But yet, here we are. And the president is about to send 400 more people in to train the Iraqi fighters. A wise move?
Well, I think it's not a hypothetical question. Jeb Bush was asked the question, knowing what you know now, would you go back into Iraq? And I think without question, it's been a disaster. And anybody who has to think twice about saying, gosh, heck no, I wouldn't go back into Iraq, really hasn't been paying attention. But it's also not a hypothetical question, because we have to ask ourselves, was it a good decision to topple Hussein? Are we better off now? Iraq's in the middle of a civil war. Iraq has become essentially a vassal state to Iran. Iran has no one to stop them now with Hussein gone. There was a counterbalance. Hussein was a counterbalance. There's an ongoing civil war. There's then a civil war within a civil war with the Sunni extremists fighting Sunni, but also with the Sunni fighting Shia. It's been for 1,000 years.
What do we do there? What do we do on the ground, given that the Christianity has been decimated and these minorities are being crushed?
Well, see, the first thing you have to realize or ask yourself is, the things we've done, have they helped Christians or hurt Christians? So I was against arming the Islamic rebels in Syria. The Islamic rebels in Syria, the so-called people on our side, have often been the enemies of the Christians. There are 2 million Christians in Syria. If you ask them, who would you prefer, Assad or ISIS? To a person, they'll tell you Assad. They've had an uneasy alliance with Assad for decade after decade. Is Assad a saint? By no means. But the thing is that there's a young man that was written up by the name of Zarkis el-Zakhem, who was killed in a little town called Malula. And this is a town where they speak Aramaic, same language that Jesus spoke. And when they came to town, he said, I'm a Christian, and if you must kill me, do it. And they did. But these were the people that were allied with, that's the nicest thing I can say, with the people who we were arming. And we don't frankly know who got all of our arms. Many of our arms are in the hands of ISIS. And so I think we have to think before we leap. And then I think we've made it worse for Christians by being involved in the Syrian war, really on the opposite side of the Christians.
Scott Walker said he would be open to sending more troops into the region. Would a President Paul be open to sending more troops?
It would be the very last thing I would do. I think war should be the last resort, and I think really putting hundreds of thousands of troops into Iraq is a mistake. I think in all likelihood, can we win a war? We can win any war. We have the political might to win any war. But there have been some very thoughtful people who have said recently, they have said, well, if you want it more, if the people there want it less than what you want, there'll never be a lasting victory or a lasting peace. The Iraqi soldiers, if they're unwilling to fight, and if they're going to continue to run, we can't want it, the victory more. Can we win Mosul back? Yes, we can win Mosul back, but who's going to hold it? Mosul's a city of 1.5 million Sunnis. Most of the army from Baghdad is Shiite. They're not going to be able to hold Mosul. The people there don't want them. So you have to have Sunnis engaged in this battle. So much of winning this battle isn't just political might. It's getting a political solution in Iraq where Sunnis are in the army and feel a part of the government. But for 10 years, we allowed Maliki to make it a sectarian government. The Kurds are good fighters and Sunnis, and I would arm them more. So part of the solution is arming the Kurds. I would frankly promise the Kurds, if they fight for it, it's theirs. You know, at the end, I'd let them have a homeland.
As president, would you support a plan that you have floated about, that you would deny aid to any country that abuses Christians, mistreats them, or allows anti-American sentiment to reign?
Absolutely. I think what's most surprising is when I introduced that amendment in the Foreign Relations Committee about 6 months ago, almost everybody voted against me. Republican and Democrat voted against me. But if you ask any American or you ask anybody watching your show, do you think the American taxpayer should give money to countries that put Christians to death or put them in prison for life for interfaith marriage or changing their religion? I think most of your viewers would say that's abhorrent and we shouldn't give them a penny. And that's where I am. But we have about 25 countries that have laws on their books, predominantly Muslim countries. About 25 of them have laws on the books that put Christians to death. There's one on death row. Asia Bibi's on death row in Pakistan right now.
No, it's an outrage. I want to shift gears for a moment, talk about gay marriage. You have a very novel approach to this, almost a middle way. You believe the states should make this decision, decide gay marriage, but what do you do if the Supreme Court, in a few weeks or a few days, says this is a federal right? What does a President Paul do at that point?
I think government, should try to be as neutral as possible at the federal level. If government gets involved and says it's a constitutional right, the real problem isn't even so much with marriage, it's what are you going to do with hospitals, with schools, with churches? If you have a constitutional right, are you going to go to a school and say that a Christian church school has to have people that the church doesn't accept, their lifestyle? And so I think that it's wrong to have the church, to have the federal government involved in the decision. It's going to lead to a great deal of problems. When they wrote the original Windsor decision on gay marriage, Justice Kennedy spent about 7 pages saying it's historically always been a state decision.
Right.
And so it'll be going back on everything he said only less than a year ago if he tries to federalize this, because he was saying it was a state decision. Other than that, you cannot discriminate on benefits. If it's just on benefits, that's one thing. If it becomes a constitutional right, the debate they had before the Supreme Court really illustrated this, is that church schools, church teachers, church hospitals are going to be told that they have to accept something that's against their doctrine.
Scott Walker is on record saying he would support a constitutional amendment should this happen, should marriage be federalized. Would you?
I've always told people I don't want my guns registered in Washington or my marriage. I don't want, the federal government's never been involved in this. Now, I would be for a constitutional amendment that says that the government can't interfere in religious institutions. It's called the First Amendment, and we ought to enforce it. Religious liberty is protected under the Constitution. So you have that, and then are you going to create a new constitutional right that butts up against the First Amendment? And that'll be the real question as to how this shakes out. But I'm not for the government coming into the church. Absolutely not. I'm not for the government coming into church schools or church hospitals and telling them what to do.
And you wouldn't support a gay marriage constitutional amendment that would ban gay marriages?
I've never really been for adjudicating this at the federal level. I think it's actually worse, because I think what would happen is we actually wouldn't win that amendment, we'd win the opposite right now, because culture's been going in the opposite direction. So my fear is that if you want to make this a national issue, you're going to lose much worse than if you keep it a state issue. You still got about 25 or 30 states in which you probably will still win the issue.
You had an amazing filibuster a few weeks ago about this whole NSA question of collecting data, and you really ended up containing their ability to collect this data and store it. Here's the question now. What about the backdoor entry, the stuff that they already have? How do we protect that and keep foreign governments, as well as our own, from getting their hands on that information, private information?
I think the best way we do it is we have to acknowledge the way the Fourth Amendment was intended to work. The Fourth Amendment says you can get information. So if you think someone's a terrorist, you can get their information. You have to write their name on a warrant. You have to individualize it. So I'm not against the government getting records individually. I'm just against them getting them generally from everyone. So a general warrant or a non-specific warrant was really one of the leading reasons why we fought the revolution. We didn't like British soldiers writing warrants, and we didn't like them coming indiscriminately into all of our houses. The court has said the president's program was illegal. Congress has now told him it's illegal, but there is still some question whether or not they'll continue doing it. And the reason why there's still a question is there's a serious lack of trust, because the Director of National Intelligence, before this was revealed, he basically just lied to Congress and said it didn't even exist.
Two of your competitors in this presidential contest, or soon-to-be competitors, Jeb Bush and Marco Rubio, have not spoken about the situation of Disney replacing American workers with foreign workers that they are bringing in. What is your reaction to it? And should that foreign visa policy be amended?
I think we need to look very carefully at how many people we need, not only for economic reasons, but for national security reasons. I've been a big supporter of looking at the student visa program, particularly in having heightened scrutiny from people coming from certain countries that have significant jihadist movements within there. We used to have that. It was a special program where we had increased and heightened review of applications to come into the country from certain countries. That I'm for. For economic reasons, I'm not against people coming here. It's just a matter of deciding what the numbers are. I also think that it's a twofold problem. We also have almost defeated the work ethic in our country. And so for like picking crops, hard work, if we didn't bring in migrant labor, we're rotting from the inside. We have people who really, we've destroyed the ethic of work in so much of our population.
But Senator, in this Disney case, these are tech workers, American tech workers in their 40s and 50s, who are training their replacements over a month. Is that troubling to you?
Well, yeah, and I think part of the reason why it's troubling is you have a stagnant or shrinking economy. If you have a growing economy, it's not as big a problem because there are new jobs and new opportunities abound. The reason why we have a great deal of trouble is if there's a limited amount of jobs, and the reason you have a limited amount of jobs is we have the highest business or corporate tax in the world. We have the highest regulatory burden in the world. We have this enormous debt dragging us down. All of that makes it such that we have a tenuous economy, and then these things become more paramount.
Final question. The Wall Street Journal had a poll recently, and they looked at independent voters. You are beating Hillary Clinton by almost 10 points among independents, and in the Republican field, you're in the very top tier. Why is that happening, and why is this establishment in the Republican Party so opposed to a President poll possibility?
I think it's one of the extraordinary strengths we have, and that is that if you poll me against Hillary Clinton in the battleground states, the purple states, right now we're beating in 4 of them: Colorado, Iowa, Pennsylvania. No one's beaten the Democrats on the Republican side in Pennsylvania in 20 years.
Why are you breaking through?
Yeah, I think it's the liberty issues. It's the issue of privacy, which attracts a lot of young people. I've been working on criminal justice reform for a long time. I think that the war on drugs has disproportionately put people of color in jail, and I've been taking this message everywhere. I also believe in economic opportunity for those who live in poverty. I've been to the south side of Chicago, I've been to Philadelphia, I've been to Ferguson with a message that I want to bring people up out of poverty by leaving more money in their community and not taking it, sending it to Washington, running it through the ringers, and then giving them a pittance back. I want to leave significant amounts. I would leave billions of dollars in the economy. In Chicago alone, we'd leave over $3 billion in tax cuts in the south side of Chicago.
How do you get around this establishment to do it? The GOP establishment, they have been savaging you, particularly your foreign policy stance.
Yeah, I think I'm the least popular person in Washington right now, but you go outside the Beltway, it's a completely different reaction. We have large crowds in South Carolina, large crowds in New Hampshire, large crowds in Iowa. They all want to be left alone. There's a huge Leave Me Alone coalition, and it's not just Republican. It's Republicans, it's young people, it's also independents as well. And I think the polls tell the real story, that there really is this movement among independents, and that's ultimately how you win elections.
Senator Paul, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
When we return, part 2 of our interview with the man at the center of the upcoming Synod on the Family, Cardinal Walter Casper. He lashes out at his critics and handicaps the Synod. You won't want to miss this. The World Over returns in a moment.
Now, once again, Raymond Arroyo.
Welcome back to The World Over. This week, the second part of my exclusive interview with theologian and former president of the Vatican's Pontifical Council for Christian Unity, Cardinal Walter Casper. Now, last week, we explored the Cardinal's controversial proposal to allow divorced and remarried Catholics to return to the sacraments after a brief penitential process. This week, we continue that discussion, and the Cardinal reacts candidly to the criticism he's received from other cardinals about his proposal. And what direction might the Synod go in October? Here's part 2 of my interview with Cardinal Walter Casper. Cardinal Pell, your colleague in Rome, recently said that he foresees, and the quote is, a massive endorsement of traditional teaching and practice coming out of the Synod. Is that what you see?
I see things more differentiated because I know many bishops who have a different position, and bishops' conferences. And so easy is not, perhaps they will be, but we must find a solution where everybody, or the great majority, the Pope wants a certain unanimity of the episcopate.
Right.
And now I cannot, it's too easy, I think, to say that there is already an overwhelming majority now.
It seems the Pope his mind is changing a bit. In his recent interview, he said this does not resolve anything, referring to your proposal, and it is a result of overblown expectations.
Obviously, there are a lot of overblown expectations. I would also say there are many expectations that the whole sexual morality will be changed. I do not think of such a thing, and the Pope never thought such a thing. And he said that it does not solve anything to give only Holy Communion.
But you do see how the granting of Holy Communion is a physical sign of a shift in the doctrine. It is, isn't it?
No, it's not a shift in the doctrine.
Then what is it if it's not
a shift in praxis? And the practice is, but
isn't the practice a reflection of the belief and the the doctrine.
That's too easy. You have praxis is founded in doctrine, but if you read St. Thomas Aquinas, tradition is much richer and much more differentiated than some cardinals who do not know so much all the things think.
But Your Eminence, most of the people, most of the divorced and remarried Catholics out there, they look in and they hear this or they read the paper. They're not reading Thomas Aquinas either. They're looking at the practice. And when they see divorced and remarried couples given communion, that conveys a message. And to quote the Pope, reality is more important than ideas. And shouldn't that be a concern?
But
the visible practice of the faith.
I did not make a proposal that every divorced or remarried people can come to Holy Communion. This is not my proposal, and this is a simplification. As a poor simplification to say that I have made this proposal is that there are certain circumstances after a penitential way they have to do, and then in single cases that's totally different from what you are blaming me now.
At the discretion of the local priest. That really is the proposal.
No,
the process be at the discretion of the local priest,
that's according to the old tradition of the church. It's under the authority of the bishop. The bishop has, according to canon law, to appoint in every diocese a penitentiary. I do not know how it is in English.
Yes, penitentiary.
He must not do it himself, the bishop. He can appoint one, he can appoint two, this is free. And I think it can be given to some priests with experience.
Help clarify.
There are many distortions of what I have said. I have kept silence in the last months because I told the Pope, Holy Father, I do not enter in a controversy, a public controversy, in a polemic with other cardinals. That's not serves the good of the Church, and I'm very, very sorry that these cardinals did not speak before with me. They never spoke with me. It is not according to the Holy Scriptures. Matthew 18, you have to speak first, and you have to come to go, and then say to the church, but not say to the mass media.
Were you hurt that they didn't come to you first?
No, they did not come. They did not come. And to some, I wrote a letter to inviting him to meet them and to speak. No answer. Well, that's not a good style. That's not a good style. But they did a lot of polemics, and this created the confusion. These polemical statements, they were without speaking before, without dialogue. I think that's not a good collegial style. I am saddened about this situation, but I think it is not my guilt. It's not my guilt, my responsibility. These were other people who made such a thing. With these public discussions they stirred up. I did not. I did not. Why they did not come and discuss it? We can discuss it. It's well, no. Okay. But,
the German Bishops' Conference recently announced that they, as a group, have decided that they will allow communion to divorced and remarried Catholics. Cardinal Marx even came out and said, we are not a subsidiary of Rome, and the Synod should not prescribe in detail what we should do in Germany. Are you concerned about that? That seems...
Well, I am not a member of the German Bishops' Conference since 60 years,
Sure.
And I do not know the text the German bishops have proposed. That's not my position. Well, I'm not the master of the German bishops now to criticize them publicly, but it's their responsibility. That's not me.
But does it cause concern for you that they seem to be, if you will, doing their own thing pastorally and doctrinally? Is that a de facto schism of some sort?
Well, I think now they await now the Synod, and they will decide after the Synod.
But they seem to be, they're ahead of the Synod. They're making their own decisions. It's sort of going on their own direction.
After now, it's not published, the whole decision, and they wanted to write a pastoral letter. I do not know. I have not read it. And that's not my thing now. And
So you don't want to talk about it?
I do not want to talk about German bishops now in the mass media. It's not my task.
Can we talk for a moment about the question 9 in the questionnaire that was sent out after the last synod as a way for the dioceses and the world to talk about these big questions? And question 9 said, how can the Church give pastoral attention to families with persons with homosexual tendencies? Where did that come from? It didn't seem to be central to the discussion, and some of the bishops said this was sort of inserted at the last minute.
I do not know who inserted it. I never spoke about this problem. This is not, and it was mentioned, as I remember, in the Synod. It was not a central point in the Synod, and then it came in this intermediate report. But this intermediate report is not a document of the Synod. The question is not what we say about homosexual unions. The problem is how to help families when a boy or a girl come and has this attraction, how to help them. And I think the council is a council about family, it's a council about marriage, and according to our Catholic understanding, such a homosexual union is not a marriage and is not a family. And therefore, I think it will not be a central point of the discussion.
What do you make of the Irish referendum approving gay marriage? Will that change, do you think, the considerations that the Church must have? Where Archbishop Raymond Martin there said, the Church needs to find a new language now to engage the young, and this should be a wake-up call.
Of course, the Church is not in favor of homosexual marriage. Bishops in Ireland were very clear about it. But to have a new language is a different thing, because our language, traditional language, is not the content, but the language is no longer really understandable for many young people. And therefore, it's right to say we must find a new language to have access to the young people, but it's not a changement of doctrine.
Cardinal Marx recently said that we should have an openness to these relationships, gay relationships. He said, because lifelong fidelity is right and good.
Lifelong fidelity is right and good, that's good, but homosexual practice is a different thing. That's not the same. Well, I do not judge now about other bishops, and I have never spoken about these homosexual problems. When I am asked, I give the answer of the Catechism of the Catholic Church, and I think that's Catholic.
Archbishop Victor Manuel Fernandez down in Argentina, who is a very well-known theologian. He has ghostwritten a number of, written the first drafts of some of the encyclicals. He said the Roman Curia is not an essential structure, that the Pope could live have dicasteries in Rome and Bogota, and might there be openness to a different form of the Church in your mind? Sans the Curia in its current state.
Well, I was very surprised when I heard about this interview of Archbishop Fernandez. I say the Pope is Bishop of Rome, and this is the fundament of papacy. Be bishop in Rome, and normally the Pope should be in Rome, otherwise it's poor
be the bishop of Bogota.
Ideology. Now, I do not agree with it. The Pope is Bishop of Rome and has to reside normally resides in Rome.
As we look ahead to this ecological encyclical that Pope Francis is going to launch. Now, I know you haven't read it, nor have I. He did have this workshop a few weeks ago with the UN, Ban Ki-moon, and some scientists, and it seems the Church is embracing the notion that humans caused global warming and climate change. Is that an advised thing for a Pope to engage in, given the shifting science and frankly just the unknowable?
No, when the Church Magisterium speaks about this problem, he does not speak as a scientific advisor on something. He does not speak as a politician. He speaks about creation. And the commandment of those to conserve, I think these environment problems are very, very urgent problems for the survival of mankind. But it's the Pope, and if we speak about, our starting point is creation.
Your Eminence, a couple of final questions. First, what do you identify today as the greatest challenge the Church faces?
I would say in our Western society, the problem of secularization. We do not deny God, but God is not important. And so that's what we mean by secularization. I think that's a great challenge, to speak a new way about God and to make God relevant for human beings.
How do you do that without giving into that secular culture, without collapsing into the secular mindset or even the agreed upon mindset of the moment?
We have to confront often after the public mindset. The Church cannot speak what people want to listen to, but to speak about God and to say in what way God is important. The message that God is our God, a God for us, a merciful God, a God of pardon, not only a God of rigor, but a God of pardon, and to make relevant God in our Western world. I think that's the main
Your Eminence, final question. We're going to see the Synod roll out in October, and the Holy Father comes out, and let's say he doesn't, in the end, accept your proposal. You will feel what after all of this time and energy?
Well, I made a question and I let it open to the decision of the Synod and the Pope, and so far I have to accept what the Pope will say.
But you've clearly invested a lot of yourself and your intelligence and bent your mind to this question
not
for
only,
a long time.
Well, I did a lot of theology in my life, and this is not my only question. And there were many people who were very happy and great, thanked me. Confessional fathers, many, who are hours and hours in the confessional every week, came and thanked me. And so I think it was not in vain to discuss this question and to bring it to the open. It does not help to press questions which are there. The questions are there, and you have to discuss it, and then we will see how the Council, the Synod Fathers, together with the Pope, and the Pope also in the final, will decide this.
Very good. Your Eminence, thank you.
Thank you.
To react to the interview with Cardinal Walter Casper, I am joined from New York by canon lawyer and priest of that archdiocese, Father GERALD MURRAY. Father, thanks for being here with us again.
Great to be with you, Raymond.
Now, there was that moment where the Cardinal said early on in the interview he disagreed with Cardinal Pell, who said in public that he believes the Synod will massively endorse tradition and traditional teaching when it concludes. Cardinal Casper did not agree. He said, no, I know other people, and we can't say there's a majority just yet. Your reaction?
No, I think Cardinal Pell has got the right answer. It's quite clear from the development of the discussion since last October that many cardinals, archbishops, theologians, canonists, they're pointing to the logical inconsistency of the Casper proposal. And in particular, Cardinal Sarah, Robert Sarah, who's the prefect of the Congregation for Sacraments and Divine Worship, he's been very strong about this. In fact, he says giving communion to divorced and remarried persons is an insult to Christ. He said that at a recent conference. And, I agree with Cardinal Sarah. We cannot treat the sacraments as commodities that make people feel good by telling them, well, if you want to receive it, even though the Church says you're in an adulterous union, we're still going to give it to you. No. Cardinal Sarah is right. Cardinal Pell is right. I cannot see the Church doing anything that would damage traditional Catholic doctrine on this matter.
Cardinal Casper also took umbrage, rather violent umbrage, when I suggested that really his proposal leaves it to the discretion of the local parish priest to decide who's married, who's not married, who can come to the sacraments, who can't. That's a lot of pressure on a parish priest, but that really is what the proposal does. Whether the bishop delegates him to do so or not, it's the local priest's problem.
Yes, as we know from experience, once a permission is given, then it's widely assumed to apply to everyone. And, his proposal basically says if you're in a bad second marriage, he won't call it adulterous, but if you're in a marriage that is called irregular, but you'd like to receive communion, well, go talk to your priest, just demonstrate to him that you sincerely want communion, and then there'll be some kind of strange penitential process, but it's not clear, what are we repenting of? Are we repenting of our adulterous second marriage? No, because that's what you're trying to have affirmed in some way. And then the couple, after some period, will be given communion. This, as we've discussed before, Raymond, this is scandalous, and it overturns the Church's self-understanding of what her job is. Her job is not to endorse things that contradict the words of Christ.
Yeah, it is curious that while Cardinal Casper is suggesting that marriage should be left to the discretion of the parish priest on some afternoon, we are now creating new tribunals in Rome to attend to things like sexual abuse and whether bishops reported them or not. So it's a very interesting dichotomy, I thought, in the week.
Right. There's a lot going on in Rome, and the Holy Father's making valiant efforts to deal with this question of sexual abuse by clergy of minors, and then the responsibility in some cases of diocesan bishops. And I think the Pope is doing a good job in that regard. But that reminds us, when you have public realities in the life of the Church, the priesthood is a public sacrament. The Church regulates the activities of priests, punishes bad behavior. Well, likewise, when it comes to marriage, the Church has to regulate how people live marriage, and if they violate their vows and enter a civil union while the first marriage is still in existence, the Church just can't step back and say, well, do whatever you want. We have to affirm the indissolubility of marriage and the sacredness of Holy Communion.
What do you make of Cardinal Casper's he did seem genuinely upset when I interviewed him, the way he's taking this criticism, and then his contention that, and I'm quoting, he did not enter into the controversy, a public controversy, or into a polemic with other cardinals, didn't he?
I thought he did. In fact, I think most people thought that this was not a private matter for discussion on an academic level. You know, in some academic disciplines, a professor will write a controversial paper and then circulate it among colleagues for their comments. No, Cardinal Casper gave a major conference at a meeting of the College of Cardinals in Rome. It was published subsequently. He authorized it to be published in book form. It's translated. He then went on a speaking tour to promote the book. He's been giving major interviews, including the one he gave to you. The Pope Francis has said he wants frank discussion. He wants gospel candor. So I think the other cardinals, by responding to his proposal, were only exercising not only their right, but also their duty to protect what is, in fact, established in clear doctrine and clear practice. Cardinal Casper is trying to create the impression here, by the way, that this is an open question. It really isn't. This question has been decided many times. The Catechism of the Catholic Church, Familiaris Consortio, 1994, St. John Paul II said no. It was primarily German bishops who wanted to change this practice. When Cardinal Pell does these things, he's only doing his duty.
No, well, I mean, under Cardinal Casper's mindset, if you have to inform everybody before you enter into a public discussion, he should have sent pre-written transcripts of his lectures to everybody before he announced it to the group of cardinals, I imagine.
Right, but this is not a novel idea on his part. He's been promoting this for years, as have others, and as we saw with Cardinal Marx and others, many German bishops seem to be in favor of this. So to say that this should have been discussed privately and he's offended, I would have to say, look, that's the nature. When you introduce a debate topic in public, the reaction will also be in public, and there's nothing wrong with that.
He didn't want to discuss the German bishops at all, or their recent pronouncement that they would go ahead and assume whatever Rome's going to do or not, they are going to give communion to divorced and remarried Catholics. Your reaction to that unwillingness to criticize Cardinal Marx and the German bishops?
I was troubled by that because this is obviously an attack on the papal prerogatives and the papal authority. The Pope is the one who decides doctrine when there are disputes, and he's the one who decides how that doctrine is implemented through pastoral practice. You know, for a group of bishops in a country to say we're going to ignore the universal law of the Church and do what we want, this is scandalous. And Cardinal Casper seeming to say, well, I don't want to talk about it. Well, you asked a couple of questions later about Archbishop Fernandez from Argentina, and he suggested that the Pope could move the Roman Curia to Bogota, Colombia. And Cardinal Casper had no hesitation saying that's a bad idea. So, you know, I wish Cardinal Casper would say, as a Roman cardinal, I defend the prerogatives of the Roman pontiff, and I do not think that local bishops' conferences have the authority or right to change universal law or practice.
You know, we got a lot of emails last week, and they were suggesting that perhaps there was an economic motive here for the German bishops, and Cardinal Casper particularly. Now, he's no longer a member of the German Bishops' Conference, but the viewers were saying, could there be, because of the tax structure there for the German Church, an economic incentive here to admit people who shouldn't be taking communion to come forward and take it?
I don't necessarily share that concern. I think it's more a bad theology concern, that they view Holy Communion as a sign of membership in the church. So if you deny communion, you're sort of telling someone they're not part of the church. I also think, though, it's in stark contrast. In Germany, you have to tell the government what religion you are. In fact, baptisms are reported to the government so that they can then assign that person to that faith group and then tax the person, collect tax, and then distribute it. If you say, as a Catholic, I no longer want to pay the church tax, well, then you're denied the ability to go to communion in Germany. You're not going to get an ecclesiastical funeral. In other words, you are heavily penalized by the local bishops if you don't pay the tax. So it's interesting that they're more interested in defending the integrity of the tax system than they are in protecting the integrity of the sacrament of Holy Communion from sacrilegious communions, which is what it is.
Father Jerry, we spoke for a moment, Cardinal Casper and myself, about the whole issue of homosexual relations. We've seen some bishops' conferences, including Germans, wanting to bring this issue before the Synod on the Family. Now, in my interview, he said very clearly, and speaking to the Irish referendum, this will not be a central part of the discussion. But only a few days later, he gets back to Rome, and he tells an Italian paper the topic was at the last Synod only a marginal topic, but now it becomes central. How do you deal with this? How do you know which Cardinal Casper is talking when?
Well, you know, again, this is very disappointing. Cardinal Burke, in comments he made over the last 6 months, has said, the subject of homosexuality is not part of a discussion on the family. You know, dealing with children of homosexual problems and how pastoral care, that's going to be an issue that comes up. But the idea that
and that's what he said in the interview,
such as Ireland, and yeah, and exactly, and then the Irish people vote regrettably to pretend that two people of the same sex can now marry, and they'll give legal force to it. That doesn't call for any re-examination on the Catholic Church of our position. It certainly calls for vociferous opposition on the part of Catholics. I mean, we have a concern for society. We don't want unjust laws, and we don't want people living in a make-believe world where marriage no longer has a meaning. Marriage has a meaning. It's a God-given meaning, and we're here to defend that.
What do you make of his contention that one of the biggest challenges the Church faces today is increasing secularism? I thought that was a curious observation.
Actually, it was one of the happiest things he said in the interview, and I see, unfortunately, a contradiction because his proposal is, I think, giving into secularization. You know, for a Catholic, the Word of God is sacred and we don't tamper with it, even when society criticizes us for it. So, you know, secularization, properly understood, means banishing God from the public square, banishing Christian and natural morality, making man the measure of all things. You know, but how do we defend the doctrine of the faith against secularization? Well, we don't water it down, we affirm it, and we also explain it. You know, one of the jobs of this synod, I think, is going to explain why is it that Christ said, if a man divorces his wife and marries another, he commits adultery. What is the logic of Christ's teaching? This isn't some kind of strange imposition that, you know, God threw on mankind. This is an essential explanation of the nature of married love. It's perpetual. It's for bringing forth new life into the world. And it's supposed to be a matter of fidelity on the part of those who contract marriage. So that's what we have to focus on. That'll fight secularization.
Father Jerry, before I let you go, where do you see this ending? What do you think will be the outcome of this synod if you had to look forward from where we sit now?
Well, I've been encouraged since the last synod, and I remember talking to you about it just about a year ago as we were getting ready for it, that the discussion has much more affirmed the unreasonableness of the Casper proposal and has come forward saying that This isn't a matter that we can just stand back and let some people get what they want. Cardinal Sarah's interventions, Cardinal Pell, Cardinal Burke, Cardinal Kafara, we can go down the list. All of these cardinals are saying quite clearly the Catholic Church has to be faithful to the Word of God, and I think that's what's going to come out of the Synod. Now, as you know, the old saying, there's process and then there's product.
Right.
And the process can lead to a lot of chaos, even if the product is good at the end. So that's something we have to keep an eye on, and I think counter it as necessary by reaffirming church teaching is neither unreasonable nor cruel. It is in fact liberating. It brings joy. The happiest thing you can do is receive communion worthily. It's very bad to receive it unworthily.
Well, we will leave it there, and that's a good place to leave it. Father Jerry Murray, thank you so much. Until next week, the show continues on Facebook and Twitter. Like me on Facebook, follow me on Twitter. The links are at raymondarroyo.com. So what did you think of the interviews with Cardinal Casper and Rand Paul? Tell me. I'm on Twitter at Raymond Arroyo. I am so excited. Very soon, I'll be sharing with you the cover of my forthcoming book for young readers, Will Wilder and the Relic of Perilous Falls. Wait until you see this. Don't miss next week's show. We'll have full analysis of the Pope's encyclical on the environment the day it drops with Robert Royal and others, plus a special Father's Day segment with New Orleans jazz legends Ellis and Delphio Marsalis. Until next time, we'll be scouting the world over for all that is seen and unseen. On behalf of the staff and crew of EWTN News, thank you for watching. I'm Raymond Arroyo from Washington, D.C. We'll see you next time. Bye now.